welcome to another day with three Globeros, one of our Spanish media. We've got Matthew Marquardt today with us. He's obviously one of the upcoming triathletes, very well known for how he combines two very challenging environments, which is his medicine studies with what, training full time, almost full time for triathlon, competing at long distance. One of the best swimmers in the field, one of the best bikers in the field, one of the strongest runners in the field as well. So very solid triathlete overall. So yeah, we're very pleased to have you here today with us. And yeah, welcome and thanks a lot for taking the time for us.
Of course, yeah. Thanks for having me.
Well, first of all, obviously, I guess we could go for the first question that everybody asks, which is how does someone who comes from a medicine background go into full-time professional athlete? And but I want to take it a little bit further because you and I met first time a few years back when you were racing as an age grouper, and you, I think you took everyone by surprise with the times and your performance, even in your first Ironman. One of the athletes that I coached at the time, Pelaya Menendez, he used to come just behind you, which is one of the reasons why at first I didn't really like you. Um, but no, jokes aside, it's very interesting how the two of you have got very, very challenging pathways professionally besides sports. And it's very interesting to see how you combine the two of them. So if you want to tell us a little bit about how you got into the sport in first place whilst you were doing the all your studies.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's a really good example of how you don't necessarily have to have every single thing in your life planned out to a T in order to find success. Because when I did my first race in 2021, so like 4 years ago, um, actually almost 4 years ago exactly, um, I had no intention of doing more than one race. And even really for the first, I'd probably say the first calendar year of racing, I had no intention of really kind of having a career in it. It kind of was just like one after the next after the next. And even now where I'm at now, I only have maybe a 6 to 12 month vision in the sport because like very much the path that I am going down is like has not been traveled before. And so no one really knows what's possible versus not. And so, um, I mean, honestly, so far I've been pretty lucky in that I've surprised myself and have been able to do it all. But there, as you go through school, like things change, and so you never really know how much longer you're actually really going to be able to do it. And I certainly had no vision of being 4 years into the sport and being as successful as I've been. So it's been a lot of fun. But yeah, so I originally signed up to do a Ironman 70.3 race purely just to have something to train for after my senior swim season was canceled because of COVID-19 and um, was really just going to do that one race. So like I like used a borrowed wetsuit, used a borrowed bike. I didn't even have an aero helmet. And that first race went like really well, and I ended up getting uh, like fourth out of 1,400 people and qualified for 70.3 Worlds. At which point I was like, you know what? 70.3 Worlds is 6 weeks into medical school. I can, like, how hard can the first 6 weeks of medical school be? I can probably balance both. And maybe sacrifice a couple things a little bit and it will all be fine. And so that's what I ended up doing and ended up getting second in my age group at 70.3 Worlds in 2021. And that was really when the first big decision had to be made of like, okay, like I'm like decent in sport, but I'm also like not at the level of a pro yet. And so I had to like really think like, is this a good use of my time? Because in the US, you have medical school and then you have residency and then you have fellowship and then you're like an independent operating doctor. And residency is even more competitive than medical school. And so, you need to make sure that you're spending your time wisely during medical school so that you're as strong of an applicant as possible for residency. And so I was like nervous, of course, to do just triathlon, but as I kind of talked to people and thought about it more, it became apparent that like, hey, it was a risk worth taking, and obviously I'm very happy that I took the risk because it's just been a really, really amazing experience ever since. Um, but yeah, and I think like what has made my rise so rapid is that I have a pretty significant kind of just endurance base to begin with. I was a swimmer in college, and like growing up, I did running and cross country and football. Like football as the rest of the world knows it, soccer as we Americans know it, and um, and so like I had all of this like aerobic endurance background. Um, and I was also very comfortable on a bike. I never raced bikes or anything like that, but like I went out on long rides all the time. And so I think a big part of the reason why I've like had such a rapid rise is because I think one, that I have a phenomenal coach, and two, that it's been about translating like the capabilities that I have from other sports and just applying them to triathlon versus starting from scratch. So,
Yeah, that's very interesting because I remember one of the times that we talked about this. You also mentioned to me that you don't see yourself in the mid long term as a professional athlete, maybe, because obviously at some point your medical pathway might have to take more over, and that you look into this as almost like, yeah, one year at a time. Um, One of the things that I was really interested from those conversations was that um, you also obviously need to put very little hours in compared to other athletes maybe. And we all know from your Instagram, which we all really appreciate, how you share a lot of that, which is really nice. Um, and I must admit that I really like the way you do it, like just on Instagram, not having like all the fancy YouTube channels and things like this. It's like very, I don't know. To me, it feels like more personal, which is, allows you to connect to people really well, I believe. Um, but you do see how you have to train very limited hours compared in comparison to other people. Um, where do you think that right now that balance between how many hours and intensity, and you do obviously a lot of indoor workouts as well, is in comparison to other people that you are going to be racing against, for example?
yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the biggest thing is undertraining a little bit is significantly better than overtraining a little bit. So, like the marginal benefit that you get from an additional few hours, can very easily be erased by overdoing it. Because once you overtrain, it's like a cliff that like is very hard to climb back over. And so I don't know. I think when I started the sport, yes, I'm on Instagram, but like I really am not active in terms of looking at what other triathletes are doing. And that was very intentional because I think it's important to just focus on yourself in terms of not comparing others to what you can do. And because what happens when you do that, when you're looking at what other people are doing all the time, even if you claim you're not, you're unconsciously setting ceilings on your limit of like, oh, so and so is doing this, you know, like I can't, no one can do better than that, or I don't think I can do that. And so when you intentionally stay kind of naive, as I have, that I think kind of is also a way to hopefully like unlock a little bit more potential because you don't know what the limit is. And so it's just like, oh, I want to get 10 watts faster, or I want to get a couple seconds faster for my pace. and maybe that ends up being like super good, but you just wouldn't know. And so you just keep pushing to get better and better. And I think that there's a lot of value in that. So I mean, honestly, I don't really know exactly how much the other pros train, but I think I'm also at a spot where that's totally fine by me because I have like pretty good results with what I've been doing. So like, I don't necessarily see a need to chase after what someone else is doing. And I think it's just really important for triathlon. Actually, someone asked me the other day, they're like, well, since you're training not as much, do you increase intensity? And um, the answer is, it's you have to be very careful with the full distance triathlon because you want to be in the correct metabolic zone. And so if you increase the intensity too much, you're actually going to be doing yourself a disservice instead of like being beneficial. So you might feel like you're not working as hard by doing lower intensity stuff, but that's really the backbone of the sport. And so it's kind of finding the balance between just really low intensity and moderate intensity, I would say. And but yeah, I never really do like super high intensity stuff.
I really like that you mentioned that because that's one of the things that I wanted to ask you at some point, and it's that at the end of the day, obviously, we all know that what works for someone is might not work for another person. It doesn't really matter if it's like completely opposite type of training, but um, polarized training has been a massive thing, and a lot of people say that when you don't have time, well, obviously, when you've got limited time, you should go for like a higher intensity to increase the density and maybe get some benefits. But I really like what you just said because at the end of the day, I do believe, and correct me if I'm wrong from your point of view, but I do believe that specificity for long distance at triathlon is absolutely everything. And one of the problems, and I see this with both age groups and even professionals, is that sometimes if we don't feel like we're actually working out really hard on training and we don't
Mhm.
get those benefits in the short term, it's almost like, oh yeah, I'm not training enough. And it's almost like that negative spiral, not just physically, as you just said, that when you overdo it, like you go through that cliff, but also mentally, like getting um, into that. I like calling it gray area where you start thinking, oh, I'm not training enough. I push myself on training to get those benefits from short intervals. But then I also start comparing myself to others, which is another point that you've just mentioned, And so, yeah, I really like that. So, um, on that note, for example, if we agree that maybe that specificity is obviously the key, and especially for someone who with limited time, what could be your favorite training session, for example? If you if you are not in Ohio, training at like 5 a.m. in the morning at minus or I don't know in Fahrenheit, I can't remember the conversion, but like very low Fahrenheit degrees, like minus Celsius degrees, um, full a year. What would be your favorite training session?
Oh, good question. I mean, I generally speaking, really, so I mean, we do all of our stuff based on lactate, and so I really enjoy kind of the runs and the bikes that we do kind of at LT1. Just because I feel like it's a really good balance between pushing yourself and being able to get into like a flow state as well as it's like easy enough that it's not completely miserable. So those are kind of the sessions that generally speaking I enjoy the most.
And I guess I think we need to clarify here that some like LT1 for someone like you, like metabolically, it's still pretty high, and work wise, it's really high, which a lot of people tend to think, oh, if I'm doing zone one, I'm just cruising, like, Miss Daisy pace, like pedaling, like coasting. Well, for you, it obviously we don't have to go into numbers specifically, but it's still pushing a very big number of watts, which if we look at watt per kilo, it's pretty high. So the work rate is really intense, and yeah, some people could be surprised how tiring 4 or 5 hours of LT1 for someone like you can be, isn't it? That right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Mm.
definitely not. I was actually just talking to someone the other day. It's like, like they say we don't really do zone two, but they say like zone two, you should be able to talk to someone during it, and that's not really the case for someone once you've built up your like. I mean, I can talk. I'm not completely out of breath, but I'm not like so relaxed like I am right now.
Yeah. um, One question that I did want to ask, and obviously I like to go through a little of a recap of how the season is going and maybe your next goal. So one question that, as we spoken before, is you've been, I guess, maybe struggling is the word, with cramping when you are off the bike. So, um, you know, there's a lot of studies and research about why someone can cramp. There are many different pathways in which that can happen. Um, but the other day I was talking to a friend and I mentioned I'm going to talk to Matthew, and he said, do you think that that's because of the maybe sometimes he's got a lower volume or in training that maybe can affect his neuromuscular patterns, like that muscular endurance and generated fatigue, and the cramping being from that neuromuscular fatigue? Or do you think that there is another reason behind that? So maybe we can talk a little bit about that, because I know that that's something that you're really looking into, and St. Yours has been a positive, has been a couple of steps forward. But maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, yeah. So kind of the full backstory on the cramping is an interesting one because I think like it's really important just in general, whenever you have a problem either in triathlon or other aspects of life to really kind of reflect and figure out when something was actually happening because a lot of times there are signs that something's happening before like it actually becomes a problem. And so 70.3 World with New Zealand was the first time that the cramping became like a problem. But there were kind of some signs along the way that this was progressively getting worse. So like at Lake Placid last year, when I got out of the swim, I got really close to cramping. I was able, honestly, the fact that Lake Placid, the start of the bike course is predominantly downhill for the first like couple of minutes. I think that's what saved me. Because when on the run from the swim to the bike, I was like really, really close to cramping. In my like same area, the front of my quads, the front top of my legs. But I was able to not do that through that race. And at the time, I was just like, oh, okay, like that was just weird, but it was okay. And then Kona was the next race after that. And I didn't have any problems cramping, but I had some tightness in my lower back that I had never experienced before, which was most likely related. And then New Zealand kind of obviously became really bad, and we've actually been trying to figure it out before then. And so, I think the easiest way to explain it to everyone is that in your body, like the hypothesis that we're going with right now, which I think is most likely true, given the response that I've had to treatment and stuff, is basically like a nerve entrapment type idea where um, in your body you have like muscle and you have different like you have layers of muscle and the muscles might not be over each other exactly the same because like one muscle let's just look at my arm. Like one muscle travels like this and one muscle travels like this. And between the muscles is where the nerve travels. So a nerve has to go to a muscle and the nerve tells the muscle what to do. And so really when you're thinking about cramping, there are kind of two main things that can be causing a cramping. You can either have the problem be in the nerve, in the muscle itself. Or you can have the problem be, um, and so when it's in the muscle, so I'm trying to think of how to explain it the best. But so like the nerve sends the signal to the muscle that it's time to contract or release. And when you have cramping, basically like the muscle is contracting and it won't release. And so the cause of that can be one of two things. It can either be the signal coming from the nerve is telling the muscle basically always that it has to like contract, contract, contract and not release. Or you can have a problem in the muscle itself where for whatever reason, the muscle will contract and it won't release. So what we think is going on in when your muscle contracts, relatively speaking, the nerve does not really stretch. Nerves don't stretch. Muscles stretch and contract. And so when your muscle contracts, the nerve that's sitting on top of it or underneath it kind of stays in place while the muscle moves back and forth on top of it. And so normally, movement happens very easily without any like real friction or anything like that. Um, but what can happen over time when you exercise, you're causing damage to your muscles, and then your body repairs them through recovery. But what can happen over time is that you can get like really small bits of what we call adhesions. Kind of a slightly more known way of that is like scar tissue, and that can kind of build up at the interface between the muscle and the nerve. And so now, when that muscle is moving back and forth over the nerve, it's kind of irritating the nerve. And then what can happen is like in a maximal effort, like a race, you can just basically go over the edge. And so that's kind of the hypothesis that we have right now as to what's happening, because there are techniques that you can do to kind of free up that scar tissue and kind of remove the scar tissue slash adhesions and enable the nerve to kind of travel through and over the muscles a lot better. And so that's what we think's going on in my case. Because really, like we looked back and we were like, okay, my electrolytes has never like I'm a very low salty sweater. I don't sweat a ton. And it's the cramping's happening really early in the race, really too early for like fatigue to be an issue, especially considering like my background as a swimmer and the fact that I didn't start the sport having this problem, but I have the problem now also kind of gives clues. And the nutrition that I have is pretty consistent from race to race, and so that's like not really a thing, not really an issue. So that's a very long-winded explanation of like why, like what we're thinking it is, and why I think that the treatment so far has been helping, and hopefully, like with a little bit more work over the next couple of weeks, hopefully that will really get me back to normal.
Whilst you were saying that, that kind of remind me to like MotoGP drivers when they've got the issue in their arms and the forearms where they get obviously from the tension that they have on the forearms, like how it affects like that friction affects their nerves and affects the movement of their arms. And well, obviously I don't have like the knowledge to explain this properly, but how they need to have surgery in the forearm to actually release that tension and almost like give space to the muscle so that that pressure is not going into the nerve and it's not generating that friction. So do you think that maybe that's a little bit obviously in very very simple words, but
Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of underlying mechanism of what's happening is similar, but like I certainly don't need surgery.
no.
um, based on like the anatomy and stuff like that, that's like pretty common. There's some like in your arms and your hands, there are certain ligaments where kind of nerves and muscles kind of travel through, and those can swell and then cause problems, whereas thankfully that's not really a case in the legs. Um, so there's no need for anything like more invasive.
Nah, of course. We don't want you to go through surgery, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
No, but that makes total sense. And it kind of well, I like how you pointed out how it's been almost like building up and how you could see those signs like looking backwards, which sometimes we just tend to look at when that happens and not at the actual origin of all this type of issues. Um,
right.
so yeah, so obviously plan yours was a bit better than what it was at the beginning of the season for you. Do you want to give us a little recap of how the season has gone so far, and whether you are happy with how the season went? Obviously, I know that you've been doing work on your aerodynamics. You've been working with some of your partners, associates, in new products and new stuff that it's been well coming up on the last few races, and hopefully will be a few new stuff as well. But yeah, how are you feeling about the season? It's going so far, and where do you see over the next couple of months?
Yeah. So I mean, the start of the season has been like pretty disappointing or frustrating, I think, overall, because I think one of the um most frustrating aspects of the cramping is that not like that the result ends up not being good, but the what's frustrating about it is the inability to express the training that you've put in. And I actually actually very surprisingly had really, really good training over the past couple of months, even though it's been a very challenging time period from time management and there have been a lot of aspects of, kind of traditional recovery that I've not been able to do. And but I was still getting better. And so I was really looking forward to expressing those improvements at Texas and same with St. George. And what just really sucks about the cramping is that it basically says, yep, no, like you're like automatically out of the race and now you're just time trialing the rest of it. And we're going to give you like a handicap that's going to slow you down for the rest of the day as well. So it's been definitely like frustrating to say the least, but I think that, I guess we can't always have only success and so um, I'm kind of trying to think about okay, like well, like this is just a bump in the road and what are the things that we can do to fix it so that it doesn't happen again in the future um and just kind of learning from it and going from it. And so it's like it's also kind of frustrating because when you have the cramping happen, you don't really learn a ton from the race. I think like what's great, I think one of the things that I love about racing and triathlon is the ability to improve. And when you go through a race where you've had a cramp, you can't really think about like, okay, was this aspect of my training helping or not? Because just the race is just about surviving at that point, not about really performing. And so I think that's like been the other thing that's been frustrating about it. But as I said, you know, not everyone can always have like a straight shot up and I've been pretty fortunate so far that I've had the path that I've had. And so um just kind of trying to take it in stride as much as possible and focus on the next one. And so um because we're kind of still trying to figure out exactly what the rest of my season is going to look like. Because obviously I've lost a lot of points at Texas and at St. George for the Pro Series. So the Pro Series might not necessarily be the most valuable thing for me to chase anymore. Because I think one of the things that I saw last year is that if you chase it too much, you end up just doing worse and worse because you're traveling so much and you're not training enough. And so I think right now, like the where we're leaning towards is kind of maybe returning more to a focus on full distance racing, and just kind of getting it in a couple of full distance races and then hopefully doing as being as successful at Nice as possible. So that's kind of the thought right now, and but we'll see. Like it's a long season, and maybe after the next race or whatever, we're going to be like, oh no, like actually maybe the Pro Series is worth it because you're racing better now um, and we can fit it in. So we'll have to see. Like I don't necessarily want to be traveling all over the world all the time because again, like what's most important to me in the sport, more so than anything else, is the ability to improve and getting good results with that is nice. Obviously for lots of different reasons, but the ability to improve race to race is really what pushes me more than anything else. And so I like to have chunks of time between races where I can train and kind of really improve. So yeah, so that's kind of the thought right now.
It's
Oye,
it's
Pablo,
interesting. It's
perdona, Pablo,
interesting because
tengo un par de
dime,
preguntas para él, si se
sí,
las puedes
dime,
hacer.
sí,
Mira,
claro.
la primera es, me gustaría saber, lo hemos visto siempre en el circuito Ironman, si en el 2023 estuve en el Open de Estados Unidos de la PTO, si le veremos participar
Sí,
en alguna prueba de T100, si le gustan, si le han ofrecido alguna wildcard o algo para participar. Y la segunda, ya que es un medio español, si le veremos competir alguna vez aquí en España.
venga.
Simplemente. Venga.
Um, yeah, so align with what you mentioned. Obviously, first of all, I think I really like the fact that you actually enjoy the process of training and getting better and not overthink too much about just rating and rating and rating because that might be one of the keys why you are performing so successfully over such a long period of time, and the last 2 or 3 years, despite, for example, as you've said, being a beginning of the season being a bit frustrating, which I think a lot of people should learn from it, because it's not all about just rating and getting good results all the time. However, and based on what you just said about like maybe the Pro Series not being your main focus, and we did see last year when you literally lost like just like a handful of points in Kona. Unfortunately, I remember like I was cheering for you during the marathon. I was like, oh, that was so close. Um, if that's not the case this year, have you thought about maybe doing some PTO events, or maybe have you got any wildcard insight, or even if you've got any contact from the PTO at all to raise the series, or is that something that doesn't interest you? Obviously, we know that you've been always more successful in the long distance and half distance, and we know that PTO is something in between that, which might benefit the shorter distance guys that are coming up into the distance now. But is that something that you are interested in, or that you like consider, or maybe not at all?
Yeah, so I did a PTO race back in 2023. And obviously like I think there's a lot of great things going on with the PTO, and I would love to do a PTO race if the opportunity presents itself. So, so they have a wild card system and there's rankings and everything. And, um, you know, in some ways the stars have to be aligned for someone like me who's not a contracted athlete in order to race. So, like I've definitely like kind of put my hat into the ring for a couple of races, but, I'm not banking on being in them, because at the end of the day, like there's kind of this whole process, and I think where I'm at right now with the results that I've had for the past couple of races with the cramping doesn't put me in the best position to get a wild card slot. So we'll just have to wait and see. I'm certainly not, I would love to, but I'm not holding my breath for it, I think is kind of the best way to explain it. Um, but overall, it's more just going to be, I think, focusing on foals, and kind of getting the experience from racing foals, as a way to get better at racing foals. Because I think that was really one of the big things that we saw at Kona, was that I made some tactical errors earlier on the bike, in particular, that end up, I think, really kind of costing me. And so, you know, in the best way to kind of, hopefully not make mistakes like that again, or similar mistakes, or completely different mistakes, is to race and to get experience. So, um, overall, I think the focus is going to be racing foals. Um, More so than kind of doing a bunch of other stuff, because at the end of the day, like PTO is a very different beast than a full distance. It's a lot more intensity, it's a lot more spikiness. And doing a block for like a PTO race is very different than doing a block for a full distance race. And certainly, yes, you get fitness boost just in general, but I think, like, again, like what's the ultimate goal? And I think the ultimate goal for me is to be as good at full distance racing as possible, because that's really my strength. And so, you just want to be careful like how much back and forth you're doing between like full distance and PTO, or even full distance and 70.3.
And considering that this year the world champs are in Nice, which have you already got your qualifications lot sorted?
No, I actually am in an interesting place in that I don't have a qualification yet, which is not necessarily an experience that I've had before.
Have you thought about which event you might consider for doing it?
Yeah, so right now, actually, as of yesterday, the plan most likely is going to be to do Ironman Cairns, and then to do Ironman Lake Placid, because the timing of those races ends up being pretty good, in that I've got about a month before Cairns and can do a good build to that race, and then would have about 5 weeks to build to Lake Placid. And both of those are qualifications for Nice, and um, hopefully in both of them I won't cramp, but it does give me two more opportunities to do a race um, and hopefully get a slot because I think, the thing that's just a little unknown right now is that like it's not really my um kind of capabilities as an athlete. It's this cramping issue. And that's kind of holding me back from qualifying. And so that feels like a little bit out of, obviously there's a lot of things in my control, but it also feels a little bit out of my control. And so I think having two opportunities to qualify would be best. So that's what we're thinking right now. But honestly, like things are still very much in flux as of the last couple of days, given the St. George result.
Okay, and here's a scenario for you. Let's say that you travel to Cairns in Australia, you get your slot. Um, did you still do a Lake Placid and put that like that would put you in for full distance within the year, or did you consider maybe not doing Lake Placid and travel beforehand with time to need, maybe doing some events around Europe or maybe in Spain? Do you think that we could see you racing in Spain something? Um,
Yes.
in order to focus on that preparation towards Nice, or do you think that you would still try to stay in Ohio and then do Lake Placid as part of your preparation?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think most likely I'll do Placid no matter what. It's a really good course for me, um, because I consider it a very fair course and that like it's a very challenging bike course, it's a very challenging run course, and so the dynamics that you have that we saw like at Texas don't really happen, and so I think it benefits me because it's like the strongest athlete is the one who does well in a course like that. Um, and and like I love the area too, and so I think most likely I'll do Placid no matter what. But I think certainly if Karen's went really well, I think that it could be up for discussion. Like oh, like maybe I should try and do another 70.3 and drop Placid. I think there are different things that could be discussed and explored. But I think most likely I'll still do Placid, and that would put me at four folds for the year, which obviously is a lot, but I've actually done that other seasons and have been completely fine with it. So I don't think at least for me, I don't think that four fulls is too much.
Tengo otra preguntita, Pablo, ya para terminar, si quieres, y ya
Vale.
rematamos. Yo le quería preguntar que, qué es lo que le atrae tanto del triatlón para esos horarios tan sacrificados, compaginándolo con estudio, con su trabajo de medicina, ese sacrificio tan grande, ¿no? Diario que hace día tras día. ¿Qué es lo que le atrae tanto del triatlón, de este deporte, para no dedicarse a otro que fuese más simple y que no necesitase de tantas horas de entrenamiento y todo eso? ¿Qué es lo que le atrae realmente del triatlón y qué es lo que le motiva para ser triatleta?
Okay, that's a very good question. um, okay, so um, well, it's like it's asking is, and this almost sort of to summarize and finalize the interview, not take more time of you. Um, we've talked through a lot of stuff. Like we know how you're rating, we know how you manage a lot of training, medicine school and stuff. What has got you so attached and so attracting to triathlon that actually makes you commit so much and have that discipline and those crazy time schedules that you have, and at the end of the day doing it with such a passion. I know that you also try to combine the two of them, like how you write the initials of name and surname of some people that have involved with cancer, and how has triathlon become such an important part for you in your life that you dedicate that commitment and that sacrifice. Well, I might not be sacrifice the right word, but how you dedicate your life to two things at the same time, and yeah, what has motivated you to keep it this way?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I don't have an exact origin of it, but I just know that my entire life I've very much been driven by trying to have a positive impact on the world, in different ways. And so, when I kind of started triathlon and when it when there was the indication that I might become good at triathlon, I started thinking, okay, how do I want to do this differently? And how can I use triathlon to make a difference in the world? Because I had actually done some cancer fundraising in the past, um, where I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro when I was 15, and I raised money for a cancer organization at that time. And I also biked across the US and raised money for cancer research. And so it was very clear to me that sport has this potential to be an incredible like driver to do good in the world. And I kind of wanted to use triathlon as to do that as that ability to do that. And because cancer has such a big role in my life in terms of kind of my future career and how it's touched other aspects of my life, it was pretty clear to me that that was the cause that I wanted to kind of devote to and make an impact on. And so kind of I don't know, I guess like it was almost like a no-brainer to me. And it's been
It's
really,
actually
really
giving
awesome.
you the why, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and it's given me a why, and that kind of helps push me through the days that aren't as fun or the workouts that I'm really tired for or whatnot. And so having that why I think is like really, really valuable. And I also think that just generally speaking, like the my profession is incredibly stressful, and you need to have ways to cope. It's emotionally stressful because you see people, going through really, really hard things in their life, or you see people dying or people that are about to die, and you need to have some way to cope. And I think working out and exercise and something like triathlon is a really, really great way to cope in a healthy manner. And so that's I also think has been really valuable to me, and that I think it makes me a better medical student because I certainly do experience like phases of like slight burnout. I think everyone does, but I do think that I experience less of it and it's less intense than many of my peers who only do medicine. So there are lots of different benefits I think that keep me in it.
So the title of this should be Matthew Marquardt, the professional Ironman, but just to get a little bit his mind off, and it just comes
Yeah,
to be really good at it. No, but
yeah, yeah. There's definitely some truth to that.
no, but it makes total sense. What's interesting is that you've gone for actually the toughest one probably of the sport, like the toughest challenge, because you could have done it in shorter distances or maybe all the sports that require less time or less
I
dedication.
know.
um, do you think that that could have been something in your mind, or maybe you just enjoyed like coming from your background in swimming with endurance, as you mentioned? It just was a kind of a no-brainer. Like once you felt that you liked it, or do you ever consider all the sport?
Yeah. It's a great question. Personally, I would love to do a sport that didn't take quite as much time. It was just that like it became clear pretty early on that the full distance in particular was what I was best at. And so that's the path that we took. But yeah, no, I do think that it's ironic that, of course, one of the people that has the least amount of free time is the one that does the sport that requires like the most amount of time.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Well, Isaac, no sé si quieres alguna cosita más o si no
Nada
vamos
más,
cerrando.
yo por mi parte, nada, que le dé las gracias de parte nuestra, que bueno, que para nosotros desde aquí de España es un ejemplo de trabajo, de dedicación, de esfuerzo y que, bueno, que le seguimos, que en todos los Ironman Tracker estamos ahí pendientes de él y que nada, que le dé las gracias de nuestra parte y que es un placer tenerle aquí y nada, pues, simplemente.
So, yeah, so Matthew, if you agree, I think we're going to wrap it up here. We don't want to take more time of you. Obviously, thank you very much for the time. I know that you're busy, and even this 40, 50 minutes is really, really appreciated. And yeah, from all of us, obviously, thanks for being an example. I think that, as you've said, is I think you're definitely making an impact as a role model, not just as a triathlete. And I think it's important nowadays to have that. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you around this season again. I want to throw something in there. You've mentioned how Lake Placid is very, it's a very honest course. I'm just gonna throw here, maybe Lance Road to 2026 is an honest course to qualify for Kona 2026, and we'll see each other there. um,
Maybe, who knows?
but yeah, no, thanks a lot for this, mate. Really appreciate it, and yeah,
Awesome. Yeah, of course. More than happy to. And thanks for having me. It was great to talk to you guys.
thanks. Cool.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Have a good
Yeah.
one.
Yo.